On February 6, 1996, George Bryant and Oscar Bridges were murdered inside their Kansas City home. The physical evidence was highly specific. Investigators recovered a bloody, partial shoe impression from the floorboards, and witnesses outside reported seeing the shooters drive away in a clean, white four-door vehicle. There was also a surviving witness. Bryant's 4-year-old daughter, Kayla, watched the executions happen. Despite her age, she provided police with an accurate description of the shooters and their car. The man who ultimately went to prison for these crimes did not fit her description. His name was Ricky Kidd. He had no connection to the victims, and when shown his photograph just days after the murder, 4-year-old Kayla explicitly told detectives she did not recognize him. While the murders were taking place, Ricky Kidd was across town. He spent the entire morning and early afternoon running errands with his girlfriend, Monica Gray, and babysitting his infant nephew. He also generated an irrefutable paper trail. Right around the time of the murders, Kidd walked into the Jackson County Sheriff's Department to submit an application for a handgun permit. The dispatcher's records logged the application as received before 1:47 p.m. on February 6th, putting Kidd far away from the crime scene at the time the shots were fired. The physical evidence cleared him too. Detectives collected multiple pairs of Kidd's shoes, comparing them to the bloody footprint found near the bodies. None of them matched. The forensic link was non-existent. An airtight alibi, multiple witnesses, and a total lack of physical or forensic evidence. Yet, the machinery of the criminal justice system had already locked onto him, and it refused to let go. During the initial investigation, the Kansas City Police Department received multiple anonymous tips naming the actual killers, the Goodspeeds and Marcus Merrill. Detectives disregarded these leads and evidence of their travel plans, focusing their efforts almost exclusively on Ricky Kidd. When Kidd provided his alibi, backed by 5 consistent witnesses and his time-stamped gun permit application, prosecutors brushed it aside. They told the jury those witnesses were simply telling the truth, but mistaken about the day. Instead, the state built its prosecution on 2 fragile pillars. The first was Richard Harris, a known drug dealer and a parole absconder who had been high on drugs the morning of the crime. Seeking reward money and leniency on his own charges, Harris was put in a hotel by the state and picked Kidd out of a highly suggestive videotaped lineup. His stated reason for recognizing Kidd, he claimed the shooter had a distinctive Terminator walk. The police took Harris at his word. They failed to investigate his background, completely ignored the blatant inconsistencies, and never verified his whereabouts. The second pillar was an outright fabrication. 2 months after the murders, police claimed 4-year-old Kayla Bryant suddenly picked Kidd out of a lineup. Detective J. Thompson wrote an official report stating the child made a compelling and theatrical identification of Ricky Kidd. That event never happened. It was entirely invented by the detectives to force a conviction. When the case reached a courtroom for the 1997 trial, the stakes were absolute. Ricky Kidd was 23 years old, fighting for his life against a sentence of life without parole. In that courtroom, the state's narrative fell apart. The prosecutor repeatedly asked 4-year-old Kayla to point out the men she saw at her house. With Ricky Kidd sitting right in front of her, she looked around and definitively answered no. The jury convicted him anyway. Ricky Kidd was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This outcome reveals a terrifying reality. A system desperate for a closed case prioritized forged police reports and coerced testimony over an objective search for the truth. Prison meant an absolute erasure of time. Kidd spent 23 years locked away for a crime he didn't commit, forced to watch his 4 children grow up entirely through photographs. But while the system considered the matter settled, Kidd refused to break. From his cell, he spent decades studying the law, filing appeals, and writing letters to anyone who might listen. His relentless fight eventually forced open the cracks in the state's case. In 2008, Marcus Merrill, one of the actual perpetrators, signed a sworn affidavit detailing the crime and definitively stating that Ricky Kidd was not involved. A decade later, the legal system finally caught up to the facts. In 2019, a judge reviewed the case and found that the original trial was completely unfair. The court ruled that prosecutors had withheld crucial evidence, relied on suggestive tactics, and that the proof of Kidd's innocence was, quote, clear and convincing. Ricky Kidd walked out of a Missouri prison a free man. And in 2025, the Kansas City Board of Police Commissioners approved a $14 million settlement for the violation of his constitutional rights. Ricky Kidd's story serves as a case study in how a justice system becomes a weapon. The investigation ignored a chronological impossibility. While the murders occurred in this confirmed window, Ricky Kidd was inside a sheriff's department submitting a time-stamped application for a gun permit. 5 separate witnesses placed him there. No physical or forensic evidence linked him to the scene. The conviction was instead through a police report that claimed a 4-year-old eyewitness identified him, despite the child explicitly telling detectives she did not recognize him. The only other testimony came from a parole absconder, who was later proven to be unreliable. In the American legal system, the machinery that secures a conviction is rarely designed to reverse one. For the next 10 years, Ricky Kidd was entirely on his own. He spent a decade studying law in the prison library, drafting appeals and filing petitions from his cell. He wrote to innocence projects across the country, but his letters were met with silence. The appeals process prioritizes finality. Once a jury delivers a verdict, the law assumes that verdict is correct, making it a statistical near impossibility for an isolated inmate to force the courts to look at the facts again. In 2007, Kidd managed to file a federal habeas corpus petition. Then came a 2008 breakthrough. The true perpetrator, Marcus Merrill, came forward and confessed. Merrill signed a sworn affidavit. He detailed the robbery, named his actual accomplices, and explicitly cleared Ricky Kidd of any involvement in the murders. During a 2009 federal hearing, Merrill testified on the record. He told the court he had a change of heart and believed an innocent man shouldn't be locked up for something he didn't do. The district judge reviewed the confession. He noted that Merrill impressed him as a truthful witness. Then he denied the petition. In the federal court system, a documented confession and proven innocence are often insufficient to overcome procedural rigidities. The case was effectively closed. The case finally reached Sean O'Brien, a law professor and former public defender. O'Brien saw the suppressed evidence and agreed to take the case pro bono. O'Brien met with the original alibi witnesses 13 years after the crime. He found their accounts to be solid, providing the same credible timeline they offered since 1996. O'Brien describes this as the asymmetry of justice, a scale that drops instantly based on the testimony of a 4-year-old or a motivated liar is incredibly difficult to move in the opposite direction. It requires massive, concrete evidence to force a release. For 10 years, O'Brien's team worked to expose the detectives who had built the case. They uncovered how police fabricated lineups, ignored the true suspects in Atlanta, and suppressed exculpatory evidence. Then the legal team shifted their approach. They would demonstrate Kidd's innocence while simultaneously proving that the state had broken its own rules to get the conviction. Proving that the state committed misconduct was the evidence needed to override the court's focus on finality. They weren't just arguing the facts, they were arguing that the trial itself was illegitimate. On August 14, 2019, Judge Darren Adkins granted the relief. He vacated the convictions and ordered a new trial. Ricky Kidd was released the next day. By September, the prosecutor's office dismissed all charges. He had served 23 years, 6 months, and 8 days. Kidd was 46. His 4 children were now adults. He had missed their entire childhoods. He now describes his daily life as a pushback against the 23 years the state said he would never have. Simple acts like driving a car, taking a bath, or walking on a carpet are reminders of the fire he uses to reclaim his life. A legal ruling can restore physical freedom, but it cannot reclaim 23 years of lost life. It leaves a permanent human deficit. Kidd chose to turn his anger into passion. He began a freedom lap, traveling across more than 20 states to speak about the flaws in the criminal justice system. He now trains the very prosecutor's office that convicted him on how to prevent wrongful convictions, while advocating for funding parity between public defenders and prosecutors. In April 2025, the Kansas City Board of Police Commissioners approved a $14 million settlement, an institutional admission of the suffering he endured. His story remains a warning about the cost of underfunded defense and overzealous prosecution. Without an intervention, the system functions exactly as it is currently designed. Ricky Kidd compared his imprisonment to standing in a crowded plaza, screaming while no one listens. To see the stories of those still screaming, hit subscribe. Next, the lead masks case. 2 men put on armor for their eyes and never returned. Ricky Kidd is the exception. He had alibi witnesses who never wavered and a team that wouldn't stop fighting.